There's a 7-minute time limit on all backbench contributions in this debate, starting with the next speaker, which is Tom Greatrex.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. For some reason at this time, my mind is drawn increasingly to lengths of time people are in particular jobs and in position. I note that this afternoon there are a conspicuous absence on the Liberal Democrat benches.
Where are they?
But I do think back to the early part of this Parliament and the then Chief Secretary to the Treasury, the Right Honourable Member for Yeovil, who was in his post for, I think, a total of 17 days before ceasing to be. And I will recall that within that 17 days, at the start of that 17 days, being in my place here in the chamber, when with barely disguised glee, he began the process, I think, of making a remarkable contribution, which has continued with the approach of the coalition, of cutting back on investments, which then subsequently, some of them have since been re-announced, at a time when the economy was beginning to grow after the longest crisis, global banking crisis, we were starting to come out of it. And from then on, we have had, for the past 5 years, a sense for my constituents, and I think constituents from members from all parts of the United Kingdom, that for the vast majority of them, the last 5 years has been characterised by things getting worse and not getting better, and all done on the basis of a sense and some really, I think, shoddy analysis of how our economy was the same as the economy of Greece, and that we were in a similar situation to justify the coalition.
I'm grateful to you. I notice there's no Nats in the chamber at present, which is unusual, but would you perhaps touch on what the effect of the price of North Sea oil has had on the actual economy of today?
Well, my honourable friend makes an important point, a different point to the one that I was beginning to make, but an important point, and the reduction in the cost of the price of a barrel of oil has had a significant impact in terms of revenues, and were Scotland to have been a separate country by now, or in the process of becoming a separate country, it would have been the equivalent of, I think, the entire education budget would have been wiped out in the course of the last few months. It just highlights the dangers of your economy being overly reliant on what is, by record, a volatile commodity, and what is, by definition, a declining one as well, given the amount of oil that's still left in the ground. I think that's an important point in relation to Scotland. But it wasn't just the Chief Secretary for the Treasury, because in his slightly longer tenure in office, it was 1,591 days ago that the Prime Minister said, in 5 years' time, we will have balanced the books. Well, he's got 63 days left in his job, and I suspect he's not going to meet that promise. Instead, as members here, well, no, I'm going to make some progress because I've only got a relatively short amount of time, that the OBR state that borrowing in 2015-16 is set to be £75 billion, and the government are borrowing over £200 billion more than they planned in 2010. Again, hardly an exemplar of a functioning economic policy. So the last 5 years have indeed seemed long-term. They've felt long-term to many of my constituents who have suffered a situation where their incomes have decreased, where they've been struggling to get into work. And in that 5 years, that long-term, they have certainly suffered real economic pain. And it might not be economic pain that's appreciated by members of the government party who've chosen to turn up this afternoon opposite, but it's real economic pain, real long-term economic pain to my constituents. And I think, actually, if members opposite were to pay some attention to the entirety of their constituencies, they would actually find that it's exactly the same. And I think the reason the government have failed their own test on the economy is because they have failed the test set for them by the people and the expectations of the people of this country. Because they have failed to create in the last 5 years and to work with an economy that works for the majority of people. Working people are on average £1,600 a year worse off than they were at the start of the Parliament. Wages are stagnant for many people, and I know from my constituents, all too many of those who have now been able to get back into work are in low-paid, insecure work, who are regularly on contracts where they wait for a text message at the start of the week to be told how many hours work they're going to get that week. And the honourable member opposite may be sitting there shaking his head in disdain, but I'll invite him to come to my constituency to meet people in my surgeries each week who are suffering from this as a result of what has been allowed to happen and the action his party has failed to take to tackle those types of exploitative contracts. And if he thinks that that is a fair way on which the economy and growth of the economy should be based, then I suggest he is not speaking for the majority of people in this country, let alone in his constituency. So I will give way.
He argues with passion, I argue with similar passion, that if he looks at the statistics, it's very clear that the vast majority, over 70% of the jobs that have been created, are full-time permanent work. And that's a benefit for his constituents as well as mine. It's working.
A number of people in my constituency who are out of work and are now in work, who are employed on 0 hours contracts where they wait for a text message, as I said, at the start of the week to find out whether or not they're going to get any hours that week, and have variable levels of hours from week to week to week, not in a way of doing a top-up job or some additional job, but as their main source of income has increased over the last 5 years. And that's the reality of the situation. It's a real situation which he should be ashamed of his government failing to tackle, because it is a disgrace in the 21st century that that's where we are, and that is exactly where we are at present. I will finally.
In addition to what he's just said, is he will be aware of the thousands of people who are now using food banks in our constituencies up and down the country, many of whom are working?
Yes. Absolutely.
Indeed, and I think my honourable friend makes a very important point about the fact that the number of people who are accessing and using food banks are the same people who are also increasingly relying on in-work benefits. They're not out of work. They're not seeking to be in work, they're trying to find work, but the hours and the wages they're getting are not strong enough or good enough for them to be able to afford to heat their homes and to put food on the table of their families. And I think that's a real feature of the economy currently. The low and stagnant pay also means that tax receipts are much. I'm not going to give away any further, so I've given away 3 times and I'm running out of time. The tax receipts are more than £68 billion lower than expected, and receipts from national insurance contributions a further £27.3 billion lower in the same period. Chronic low pay only drives up the costs of welfare, where the bill is now £25 billion higher than was planned in 2010. These problems have been exacerbated over the last 5 years and not solved, and that skews the economy towards the interests of the few, not of the many. That's why we fundamentally need a change in approach, and that's why we need an economy which is focused on ensuring that people can earn decent wages and can live and survive, and that way can increase the tax take and also reduce the benefits bill as a result. And that's why the choices that all of us will have and our constituents will have at the election are so fundamentally important and so crucial to the future for very many of our constituents. There is an alternative, and I know that my own constituency, we badly need a change of approach. Youth unemployment is 5.7%, above the UK average of 3.2%. Median wages last year were 10% lower than the UK average. Every week I hear from people concerned about the contracts under which they're employed and the prospects and their fears for their children being unable to find work. For those people, the last 5 years have demonstrated a government that has failed them. There is a choice coming at the election. I think the government have demonstrated they have a failing plan. They boast of economic success, but they have created the early signs of recovery that only works for a handful at the top. There is an alternative to this plan. There is an alternative to a failing plan, and that is a much better plan. The economy must succeed for working families across the whole of Britain, for all of the people in this country. In 63 days' time, I think the people of this country will succeed where the Prime Minister has failed. They will hold him to his pledge, and in his own words, his failure on the economy, they will kick him out, and it will be good riddance to a failed government.
Brooks,